School Board. So with that, I want to welcome Mr. Hardy. Thank you for coming here this evening.
Thank you, Diana, for having me here.
Yes, I know this is very exciting because there's a lot of articles that have been in the Pioneer Press about the St. Paul School District, and so even though this program is initially being broadcast not in St. Paul but actually out of White Bear Lake and to many of the other communities, what goes on in St. Paul School District is of great importance, even to the suburbs, because you know, there's the education of our children is important no matter what school district the children are coming from, because eventually they are going to be the people who are going to be working in our state and in our communities. Yes. So it's very important. So yes. I want to thank you once again for coming on.
Yes. So glad to be here, and especially like that you focus on getting the citizens, the people involved with policy making, because that's really what we look for as school board members and school board leaders. And so I'm excited to have this conversation and look forward to talking to people even after today's program.
Yeah, very good. And for our viewers out there, as time goes on, we will be having other additional information that you can go to, that you can look at after the program is done. So make sure you have your pen and your paper handy. You might find a few things you might want to jot down. So anyway, now Mr. Hardy, tell our viewers first of all a little bit about yourself, because you're relatively new to the school board.
Yes. And
you know, they maybe haven't really read a lot about who you are or what your passion is. Tell us.
Sure. Well, I'm a Minnesota transplant. I've been in St. Paul since 1988. I was born out east in Buffalo, New York. As we like to say, upstate New York, it's the real New York, as opposed to New York City. So we talk about that a lot. And then later on in my childhood, my family moved to upstate South Carolina, a city called Seneca, South Carolina. So I did most of my growing up in the Deep South. My father is from northeast Georgia, and then my mom's from upstate South Carolina. I always had a desire to live in Texas for some reason. So as I was coming up through middle school and high school, I said, I want to go to college to Texas. And so being an independent thinker, which I've always have been, after I graduated from high school, I decided I wanted to go to Texas. So I ended up going first to a faith-based college in a town called Keene, which is just a few miles outside of Fort Worth, Texas. And then left for a period and came back and finished at the University of Texas, Arlington, with a degree in journalism. My senior year, I served as an intern with the Burlington Northern Railroad, which at that time had its headquarters in Fort Worth. So when I finished and graduated from college, the company said, well, we don't have a job for you here, Keith, but if you're willing to go to St. Paul, Minnesota, we'll transfer you there. So that's how I ended up here in Minnesota. Neither one of my parents had a chance to graduate from high school, both being African American in the Deep South back in the 30s and the 20s, as their generation. You know, public formal education wasn't afforded to a lot of their generation. So my mom dropped out in 10th grade, and my father dropped out in 8th grade. So it was always important to them that the three of us children at least got a high school diploma. So they were honest about education and reading books. They bought the Childcraft encyclopedia, so people remember those. And so we were reading at an early age, and I took to reading and took to learning. And so for me, school was an adventure and a journey. But I know a lot of students, it's not always that way. It's a bit of a struggle. So because I had ingrained in me from my parents and ultimately my extended family when we moved to South Carolina, where most of my extended family lived, education was always a high priority for me to get my own education, but they also taught me values such as helping other people. And like I helped my grandfather try to learn to read. He wasn't a reader at that time as I was growing up. And so I learned to try to tutor and help people. So I helped people with math and with reading. And so in me during that time was born that seed of really empowering people through education. And I've carried that with me now as an adult and here on my first term on the school board. As I came up here with Burlington Northern Railroad, I sort of switched career path. My undergraduate degree was communication with journalism. I had planned to write for a newspaper. But with the change in job when the Burlington Northern Railroad moved me to St. Paul, I moved into information technology and decided to become a technical writer. which basically means I write all those manuals that people don't want to read except when they need to use a computer.
And probably that was a wise move to switch your direction of your career a little bit, considering the fact that with the internet and technology, that journalism isn't quite what it used to be writing for newspapers years ago.
Yes.
So I think you made a wise move there.
Yes. And it's held me in good stead now coming on a school board, because quite often people say, well, do you have an education background where you're a teacher and do you have children in the school district? And to me, a well-rounded school board, and really any kind of well-rounded elected leadership, whether city council, state government, it helps to have people who come from different backgrounds. So I bring a corporate background, I bring an information technology background to my policy making and other decision making that I get to do with a board member.
Well, in listening to you as well, it strikes me that this idea about having a well-rounded background is really something you do bring to the table, because as you mentioned, you're a transplant, that you're not just from Minnesota. And I think when a person has that exposure to being in other communities, in other states, and having participated in other different school districts, you've seen different ways that people have addressed probably the same issues.
Yes.
Because I think that we have similar issues everywhere. It's just that there's different ways to address them and different solutions and different proposals in how to meet the challenges. And you probably have come with a wide background, having seen that from many different states.
And that's so true, Diana. And it's interesting now, I'm the representative for our school board on one of the national school board organizations. It's called the Councils of Urban Boards of Education. So as I talk with my school board colleagues from around the country and hear, what's happening in upstate New York and the East Coast, and what's happening in South Carolina and Tennessee and the South and California out West, we have, as you mentioned, a lot of similarities of pluses and what's going well, as well as opportunities, as I like to call the challenges. I call them opportunities.
There you go.
But then the approach that changes is really part of this cultural competency. And we're spending quite a bit of time talking about that in St. Paul Public Schools and a lot of school districts, is this cultural competency. And for many people, it tends to center around racial, ethnic differences. And that definitely is a key component. But me being a transplant, first and foremost, it's the Midwest, Minnesota cultural that I need to be competent in, and so I've been spending years just trying to understand, how people in general approach life and policy making and decision making, and what's important to families. Like here, it's definitely a very family centric, as in many parts of the country, but I especially feel that here as I moved to St. Paul. Are we all from especially the SON families and people like that who maybe came here after the American Indians, of course, settled the area, but then also just that sense of togetherness and bonding, and how important it is that I get to know you as a person. Don't come at me with all this information or legalese or you got to do this. First, I want to know. Call me by my first name. Call me Diana. Let me know a little bit about you, and then tell me your ideas of how we can better. In my case,
and I think that's part of that, developing a level of trust.
Yes. Yep.
And a feeling that this is somebody that you can count on, somebody that you can refer to, that they understand your position, or that they understand, or they're listening. And I think that this idea about how do you build trust, not just with the students, but with the families and with the school administrators and teachers, because they all come from education from different perspectives, and sometimes at conflicting perspectives. But yet they have to have some kind of level of trust to be able to work together for the end goal, which is to educate the children so that they can grow up to be productive adults and pay into Social Security to take care of you and I.
So that too. The ultimate goal. But you touch on a key point. It was really part of my value system, being an elected leader now. And earlier, before I came here, I had a chance to, along with some other school board candidates and city council candidates, talk with the Student Senate at Metro State in St. Paul, the East Campus. And so we were talking about what brought us into wanting to be elected leaders and government officials. And so we talked about getting involved at the grassroots level and helping out with organizations or volunteering or being a student representative and those type of opportunities. But the bottom line for me is to have feet on the street policymaking. I have never felt comfortable with any kind of leader, whether they're elected or appointed, who says, you know, I'm going to make these decisions here in this little glass bowl of where my office is, whether it's a Capitol or a city hall, wherever it might be. And I don't really know what's happening down there on the street level. I just, you know, this is my idea of what's happening, or I'm going to listen to a couple of people. But part of my own family value system that my parents taught my sisters and me is that you listen to people. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth that you hear quite often. But for my family and for me, it's just important to go to where the action is happening. So my first 18 months on the school board after I was elected 4 years ago in 2007, I went to all of our schools in St. Paul. At that time, we had 81 schools and programs. So I sat in the classrooms, I sat in the principal's office and listened to the principals tell me what's happening. I went and talked to the teachers, I talked to the students, watched them in action, and as I had a chance, talk with parents and families. Because when I come to our office, which people know as 360 Colburn Street, that's where the St. Paul Public School Administrative Office is located, and we're talking about, you know, should we change this policy? Should we approve this practice? You know, what about this curriculum? So all the decision making I get to do as a board member, I hear what administration brings to us, and then I also know, well, here's how it actually plays out on the street at the school, and that's very important.
And you know, and that was something that struck me when I first met you. It was at a meet and greet, and you were talking about exactly that. And I thought to myself, well, one of the things that I firmly believe that is so important to citizens today is that they feel not only listened to, but that they feel like they are partners in the creation of the public policy of their community. No matter whether or not if it's municipal level, county level, school board, you know, they can even be part of that public policy making at the state and the federal level. But that is what they feel they're missing today. And you were talking about at this meet and greet this idea about the, you know, the feet on the street philosophy of getting out and talking with people, actually talking with people. And I found that quite refreshing, because a lot of elected officials, I find that once they get elected, they have less of that. And I think it's important that they have more of it. And I think that's one of the things that, again, you bring to the table as somebody who's been on the board, that your commitment is indeed to listen to the citizens.
And I appreciate you pointing that out, because it's so true. I mean, people talk to us as board members and say, "Is that a full-time job? You know, you get paid, you know, a salary for this?" And no, we get in St. Paul, we get a bit of a stipend, but you know, I work full-time at U.S. Bank. I work in a corporate environment. For me, and you touched on a little bit earlier with your comments about the educators and the teachers and administrators and being able to talk with me. You know, I didn't come to being on the school board with this big education industry background. I came with an education background, love of education, and I do some community teaching and with adults and with young people now through some programs. But I came in saying, you know, I'm going to be the person who helps make the policy. You know, that's the number one job of a school board member. You set policy. You know, you tell people what you do as a school board member. But for me, I want to gain that trust, and what Stephen Covey talks about, the emotional bank account that you build up as people get to know you, and you know, the whole Midwest principle is important to people, so that when I call a principal, say, "Can you explain that program to me and how that's working with your students?" Or I go sit in a teacher's class and they talk about, you know, this integrated principle of teaching math, and I know a little bit about that, then I can go do some research. And so I want them to know that I'm not a know-it-all board member. And now it is so important, especially in any school district, but in particular an urban school district where you have so many students who come from so many different backgrounds, or students who've immigrated, or students who have their various socioeconomic needs and challenges. I have to partner with people who have the specific knowledge and be able to listen to them and pull their information in and help them feel empowered to sit at a decision-making table or to contribute some ideas that the superintendent can consider as, in this case, she makes decisions to bring to us for approval.
Right, exactly. And you know, and this idea about the school board members are the creators of public policy, that was a theme that was certainly underscored the candidate forum that I attended it was about a week